When some innovative caveman invented the bow and arrow, it was a huge breakthrough. The discovery turned the Homo sapien into an efficient hunter-gatherer. These days, archery has made a comeback in the hunting community, and it's even been reclassified as an Olympic sport. So you could say the caveman's invention is still right on the mark. Today's bows are definitely not primitive devices. Crafted with calculated precision, they make it easier for you to take your best shot, and the caveman would have been very impressed. To make a longbow, a craftsman cuts 6 strips of cherry wood, a little more than ½ centimeter thick, using a bandsaw. Then with a belt sander, he repeatedly thins the wood strips on both sides, tapering the ends a little each time. The tapering gives the wood some flexibility, which the bow will need to launch arrows into the air. With his bandsaw, he now carves a handle from a piece of wood. Next, he brushes super adhesive glue onto fiberglass strips and the tapered strips of cherry wood. He works swiftly because the glue will start to dry in less than an hour. Now he layers the strips. The fiberglass strips buttress the 6 glued wood strips on either end. This process is called lamination. Next, he glues the wood handle to the fiberglass and wood lamination. And he tops it with a piece of masking tape to protect it from scratches and glue smudges during the next steps. Now the laminates get the squeeze. He places them on a curved plywood shape called a bow form. He positions a steel heat strip, a rubber hose, and another plywood form on top of the laminates. He clamps it all together, then inflates the rubber hose with an air compressor. The pressure from the hose combined with the heat from the metal strip mold the wood to the bow shape as the glue sets. 1 hour later, he removes the laminates, nicely pressed and glued into more bow-like curves. Now he draws the bow form onto the newly curved lamination, following a template made of fiberglass. With his bandsaw, he cuts the wood along the lines he's just drawn. He cuts an arrow shelf. That's the notch for the arrow to rest as the archer aims. Then he trims the handle, making it a little wider at the center for comfort. Next, using a coarse-toothed file, he hollows out little grooves in the upper and lower limbs of the bow. They're called string nocks, and the string will loop around them. To strengthen the tips, he glues little pieces of fiberglass and moose horn over them and the freshly filed nocks. He clamps it in a vice grip to set. When it's dry, he files through the horn and fiberglass to bring back the nock groove. He smooths it with sandpaper. Now he glues another piece of wood over the handle to improve the look and feel of it. He clamps it together while the glue dries, and 3 hours later, he sands it. Next, he wraps the handle in a piece of leather and stitches it together with nylon thread called artificial sinew. Many years ago, they used the tendons of an animal for thread. The leather will make the bow easier to grip. With a gel pen, he writes a serial number on the back of the bow, along with the draw weight. This bow will hold about 20 kilograms of pressure in check when it's drawn. This is a Flemish string jig, a wood fixture with posts on it. He loops nylon string around the posts. This is how he measures the string. It's always 4 inches shorter than the bow. He cuts it with a utility knife, then rolls wax onto it to make it easier to work with. He measures some string. Then he twists 16 strands of nylon, 8 black and 8 white, into a braid with loops on the ends. He hooks the string on the nocks, and it's time for target practice. As he bends the bow, energy is stored. He releases it, and the energy propels the pointed projectile. That apple didn't have a chance.
The violin developed in the 1500s, evolving from a series of guitar-like instruments that musicians played with a bow. While the violin is best known for classical music and gypsy music, today you hear it in pop, country, bluegrass, and even jazz. First, they cut a piece of maple, then split it in half to expose the grain in mirror image. They melt down glue flakes made from animal hide, then bond the pieces together. Violin makers use only glue, never nails or screws. These pieces of wood will form the back of the violin. After 4 hours, the glue is dry and they can remove the clamps. Using a small plane, they even out the surface. Then they trace the violin's shape and cut it out. They shave the surface, sculpting a downward slope from the middle, using an even smaller plane. Then they carve a groove along the circumference. After dabbing it with glue, they insert what's known as purfling, a reinforcement made from a thin strip of hardwood, usually maple. Finally, they carve the reverse side to the right form and thickness. Next, they make the sides of the violin, known as the ribs. First, they soak thin strips of maple or sycamore and press them against a heated bending iron to curve them. Then they glue the strips around a form, connecting them at the top and bottom and at the corners with small blocks of wood. They clamp everything together and let the glue dry for 4 hours. Next, they glue thin strips of wood, called counter ribs, onto the edge of the ribs. This enlarges the surface so that it's easier to glue the ribs and the back together. They make the violin's front, or belly, from a solid piece of spruce. To the underside, they glue a spruce support bar called the bass bar. Sound escapes through the 2 curved slots called F-holes. They cut out and carve the violin's neck and scrolled head from a piece of maple. Then they glue it to the body. They sculpt the fingerboard from ebony, a hard wood that's durable enough to withstand centuries of violinists' fingering. Using a tool called a peg hole reamer, they make holes for the ebony or rosewood pegs around which the strings are wound. They coat the wood with 4 or 5 coats of varnish, depending on the color, then polish it with several coats of oil over several days until the finish is shiny and silky smooth. Next, they insert the sound post. This little pine cylinder conducts sound and supports the belly against bowing pressure, so it's critical to position it in precisely the right spot between the belly and the back. It's not glued, but rather wedged into place. The bridge isn't glued either. It's held in place by the pressure of the 4 strings, which they feed through the ebony tailpiece and wind onto the pegs. The bridge has little notches in which the strings sit. The violin is finished. They make the bow from horsehair and a high-quality Brazilian wood called Pernambuco. They bind the hairs at one end with a strong sewing thread, then burn them and seal them with wax to prevent fraying. This end goes into the frog, the wooden box at the bottom or heel of the bow. They cover the frog with a mother-of-pearl lining, then slip on a ring made of nickel, silver, or gold to prevent the hairs from tangling. Next comes the screw that controls the tension of the hairs. They comb the hairs to make them parallel, then insert them into the tip of the bow, known as the head. They tighten the screw until the hairs are taut. Finally, they rub on rosin, a sticky pine tree resin that keeps the bow from slipping off the strings.